Here we go. Little frame wrap I'm doing for my brother on his 64 Impala. And this here is a regular frame. It's not a Canadian frame. Some of you might know, some of you might not. But this is just a regular frame. We're going to wrap it and get it underneath the Impala. We're wrapping it here with 3/16 inch steel. This will be my first frame wrap. My brother and I, we got it on the rotisserie. And I'm going to take you guys along here so you can see the process. I'm about 2/3 done now, and I decided to switch the video up and make it 2 parts so it's not like a half-hour long video, because it might get a little monotonous seeing the same thing over and over. I did not buy a frame kit with this. I've been using construction paper to make my templates, and then my plasma cutter to cut it out on the sheets of steel. And we decided to save some money. This is kind of more of a budget build. I could have had it sandblasted and could have found a Canadian frame. All those things would have costed more money. And we decided to opt out for that and go a cheaper route so that we can just build a budget frame right here. So I'm taking you along for the process. There's the bump stop there and the brake line holder. We went ahead and burned that off with the plasma cutter. There's 2 different tips for the plasma cutter. Actually, there's a few of them. I started off, I bought like what's called a gouge tip, and that's for gouging welded on pieces of metal. And I found after a while that it gets kind of a pain having 2 tips and having to change them. And if you take the regular cutting, the standard cutting torch, and you just turn the amperage down on that, and you just turn your plasma cutter at an angle, it will blow those welds off just about the same as the gouger. So you don't really need to buy that second tip. You can if you want to, and it's kind of a good safety precaution if you're worried about blowing holes through the metal that you're cutting. This here, I was gonna put together a tool, and I did not. I just went with the Betsy C-clamp. And this part here was the hardest to get to fit on here. As you can see, it's a pretty wide piece of steel, and bending it around these sharp curves was a bit of a pain. So as you can see here, I got a little helper bar. Now I know how those C-clamps and bench vices have like bent arms on them. So now I know. You just put a little helper tube or a helper piece of pipe on there, and boom, that's how you end up with a bent one. But I don't care. If I need to buy another one, I will. Right here is my plasma cutting. We'll shoot through that pretty fast here because not a whole lot to say about that. What you see here, the side rail, and when you cut these pieces out yourself, like I said, we're doing a budget build. You're gonna have quite a bit of grinding to do. When you get one and you buy it from someone and you can buy it from like Hoppo's, or there's other places that sell them like individuals as kits, and they cut them out. They use a plasma CNC table. It comes out perfect and nice and neat and way easier. As far as you cutting it yourself, you're gonna save a lot of money. I got about $400 in steel, $100 in welding wire. Then of course you got your welding gas and your tips and your electricity, as far as cutting that out and making your own templates. And then your time, it's very time consuming, making the templates and then drawing them out on the steel and then cutting them out. And then what I'm getting to here is you're gonna need to grind the edges and make them flat or semi-flat for when you go to weld it, because your hand is not gonna be as steady as that CNC table. Right here, we're gonna fill in the bottom of the pockets here. That way my springs don't end up shooting through the top. We'll weld a donut on here later and then cut out some holes so that the cylinders can go through. I probably could have cut the holes early, but I opted to go ahead and cut them after I got everything wrapped. Not really to save time, but just to make sure that when I was putting it on there that the holes would align. I'd rather go through a little more of a pain in the butt cutting the holes afterwards after they're welded on there. I'm just going to use a drill and some hole saws to cut those out. Here's my tunnel, and on the other side here, I made, if you saw there in the beginning, you might have noticed. If you didn't notice, I'll let you know ahead of time that I should have cut it. Now, what I should have cut out, not really the holes, but I should have cut out the part where the center bearing goes to your drive shaft. I should have cut that out, and I didn't, so I'm going to have to cut that out afterwards and then fix that. And the part where I cut for to give the drive shaft a little more room in case we want a high lockup, we don't want our drive shaft to drag on the center support there. I cut it a little bit too small after looking at some other people's and in other frames, and I'm going to go ahead and fix that while I'm cutting out the center bearing holder. If I don't remember the name of it exactly, but it's something like that. I put on some heavy welds here, as you can see. I went ahead and welded nice and heavy and kept it hot, so that my brother, he's choosing to grind it himself to save some money, and I wanted to leave him plenty of material when he's grinding. So when you see those big ol' honking welds, that's why, so that he's got plenty of material to grind those down, and I don't have to do as much filling in afterwards with a welder. So here you can see the plasma cutter makes quick work of cutting out little pieces and big pieces. I wouldn't suggest trying to do it with like a angle grinder and a cutting wheel with a 3/16. It's really just, it's too much. You would basically have to have at least a plasma cutter. You don't have to buy some fancy one, but you would want a plasma cutter. As far as grinding, I'm going to use 60 grit flapper disc, or my brother's going to. 60 grit flapper disc to start with. I might use like the grinding stone on an angle grinder to knock down the big stuff. Go to the flapper disc, then some sandpaper afterwards. And I will probably have to get some 2-inch curved 60 disc or 60 grit flapper disc, the curved ones, for these inside parts here. I'll find out when we start grinding. I might help them a little bit on the grinding. Right here, you don't have to take these off. I chose to take them off. There's a couple different ways. You could cut underneath them and slide the metal in. That seemed like a lot of extra work to me. I went ahead and marked them, as you can see on there, with a marker, a paint marker, and then where they go. And I went ahead and hacked them off with my plasma cutter here, so that I can just slide one big solid piece on there and then weld the parts back on after they've been cleaned up. Some of the stuff I wasn't going to need, so I've been cutting it off as I go. One of the things you saw there was the pan hard bar, and we're not going to run a pan hard bar. We're going to run first we were going to run a Y bone, which would use that center support part there that you'll see. We decided, after cutting on it for a while, we decided to go with a wishbone. So here on the next video, you'll see I'll cut that off of there, and then that way I can just wrap it in one solid piece. As far as cutting my own sheets of steel, it takes about 2 sheets of steel, 4x8. And there's not as much scrap as I thought there would be. I thought there'd be a lot more scrap with the piece like this that's arched a whole bunch, but you can use those center pieces that are left over for smaller parts, like when you go to wrap the body mounts, and pretty much the body mounts. Here you can see I just drew a line on there with the paint marker, cut the lip off, and we're gonna wrap this just like we would a set of A-arms. If you're doing this for the first time or thinking about doing it on your own to save some money, you can save a lot of money. Make sure you got some good welding skills or at least some good grinding skills, and you know how to run a welder hot enough where it's going to actually penetrate and weld the metal on their weld, because you're not going to want cheap welds that might break on your frame. That's the backbone of your car here. You can save a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. As you can see here on the bottom of the video, as you see those hours pop up, that's how many hours I got going into this. That does include pulling the frame apart and stripping it down. So that took about, I can't remember exactly how many hours off the top of my head, but I have it incorporated into the hours that total here on the bottom. I would suggest if you are thinking about doing this yourself, that you start with maybe a set of A-arms, extend some A-arms, wrap those, mold those, see how well those come out, and then if those come out good and you feel confident and you did a good job on them, then I would say you're ready to start on a whole frame. It's just a lot more work, a lot more hours, and you just got to keep chipping away at it and doing a little more, a few hours every day off that you got, or maybe a couple hours after work, and then it'll slowly get done. It is a lot of work, and it's a nasty job. It's dirty. It's hard work. Here's how the spring pockets came out, the perches. So far I've done it with the Big Betsy clamp and a small clamp. I would suggest either getting like a frame tool if you don't know what I'm talking about. There's like 2 videos of people who have them on, there's probably more on different YouTube videos, and they'll show you how to make one. I believe his name's No Limit, or he goes by No Limit Hydraulics. He'll actually show you how to make one out of an old Betsy clamp, and that's what I was gonna do, but then I started going on it with just a C clamp, and it just kept going. So I'll probably do that if I do decide to do another frame. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. Again, that's No Limit Hydraulics, and then like a frame clamp or frame tool, and he'll walk you through and tell you everything you need to make one of those. Also, I think it's Red Rocket 64. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've seen his, and he also has a frame tool that him or one of his friends had put together that looked pretty good too. There you can see the marks on the side of the frame. That's where I'm gonna weld the braces back on for the frame brace. You can see there my welds, even though they're big, I'm probably gonna have a little more welding to do on that to fill it in. When you go to do this, I didn't start off doing it, but I would suggest, see how I just have, these are just tacked on. You're gonna wanna tack them on. You don't have to do like the full welds like I started off doing there in the beginning. Get it all tacked together, and then I would weld in through. You're gonna wanna make your welds where they can hit all 3 parts. You're gonna want it to start in the middle where it's actually welding on the frame, and then move it back and forth where the weld is hitting both sheets of metal that you're welding to the frame. So make sure you do that. You leave enough space. Don't box in the frame and cover up the actual frame and just weld the sheets of metal together. You don't want to do that. You want it to be welded to the frame to get that extra strengthened and rigid frame. This here, make sure you're just tacking these on and bending them. So you tack it on. The last one, if you saw, I clamped it from the top part of it, and it kind of made it off angle, and I didn't film it, but I had to end up cutting that one off. So make sure you just tack it on in the beginning and then fill it in. Otherwise, you might end up having to cut the whole thing off, or it'll just end up a mess. So I strongly suggest tacking things together before you weld it up. Like I said, I'm going to drill out the holes with a hole saw and a drill after I get the frame all welded. If you're enjoying this content or it's helped at all, I would appreciate you giving me a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, watching the video through. And if you didn't enjoy it, then of course then you don't have to follow or do none of that stuff. But I appreciate all my new subscribers. I appreciate everyone who takes the time to make a comment. And if you have any suggestions, just drop it in the comment below. Right here, this is the non-Canadian frame, as I mentioned earlier. So it's kind of C'd right there. If it was a Canadian frame, it wouldn't be like a C. It would be totally boxed in. This one is not, and the bottom is a little bit narrower than the top. So as you can see here, I'm going to clean it up on the top, and then I'm going to weld a wider piece on the bottom so that I can get a box versus like an angle. If you see there, I just welded it there on the top from the inside, and I'll drop around here to the bottom so you can see what I'm talking about. Right here. So I'll be able to box that in from the inside, which you'll see on part 2. I did most of my cleaning. There's a smiling happy me after I finally got some good welds in here. You can see here, that's the way I wish all the welds looked, but I hadn't welded in a few years, so I was a little bit out of practice when I started. Now they're coming out pretty good, and that's how I want them to look going forward. So that's another reason I should have started tacking it instead of just welding it to get my practice in. Anyways, God bless. You all have a great day, and I'll catch you on the next one.